Hi, folks. I'm Father Joe Grimaldi. You can call me Joe, and I'd like to welcome you to my podcast. But now, here's our host and friend, Ken Calvert.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Father Joe Grimaldi podcast. I'm Ken Calvert, along with Father Joe Grimaldi, and Father Joe just returned from saying Mass. It's a beautiful day here. We're going to hit temperatures once again in the 80s, and well-deserved, don't you think?
Very much so. We had the opposite just a few days ago.
Oh, I'll tell you what. Wait 15 minutes. It'll change.
We live in Michigan.
And that's the beautiful thing about Michigan. It does. We have all four seasons. Let me ask you something. Just thought of this. Does attendance go up, go down in nicer weather?
Because it's a daily Mass, you have the same people that do that every day. It's part of their schedules. They do it automatically.
But you do see the numbers go down in the summer, especially in the great state of Michigan, where a lot of people do, as we like to say here, head up north.
You bet your life. There's a big difference. If you go up north, for example, the main churches that they have there, they just beef up their attendance like crazy in the summertime. And then as soon as the late fall comes, wow, they're down to almost nothing.
Do priests get, a retired priest like you, Father Joe Grimaldi, do they get assigned to parishes maybe up north just for 3 or 4 months to help out?
I'm sure they do. They have to, yeah.
How do we take the show up there?
Actually, you could come with me to Hawaii, and that would work, too.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, the next time you hear the Father Joe Grimaldi podcast, we'll be with you next time from the wonderful beaches of Maui. Boy.
That's right. That would be wonderful.
Today, we're going to talk, I'm going to get to ask all of the questions. You have not seen the questions, and we will hear the answers. But it has to do with your vocation, actually vocations.
Great.
Right? Both being a brother, an Irish Christian brother, and a Catholic priest. So here is question number 1, Father Joe Grimaldi. Why did you become a priest?
Can I say why did I become a brother first?
Yes, I wish you would.
I went to one of the brothers' schools, All Hallows, which is located in New York City. In any case, I observed what the brothers would do on a daily basis in their teaching, their interacting with the young men, and actually even playing sports with them and things of that sort. So eventually I said, I think I would like doing that. I brought the whole situation home because I was still in high school. So I was a junior at the time, and I still had another year to go at All Hallows. But I mentioned it to my family. They were not exactly thrilled about it. Now, mind you, they're from the old country, and they said, well, why bother becoming a brother if you want to do that kind of stuff, become a priest? Well, not realizing that they are two separate vocations. The vocation to the brotherhood involves really immersing yourself in teaching, whether it be high school, elementary school, or college, whatever the case might be, or working in hospitals and things of that sort. Whereas being a priest, you're working your ministry in a parish setting. In any case, I did say to my family, I really do like the idea of becoming a brother, which is different than the priest. What makes it different? Well, the brothers live in community life. Community life is supposed to show to the public that people of different ethnic groups and colors and so on and so forth can live together in harmony, and supposed to, in itself, teach or give a lesson to how to live together in harmony to the general public that surrounds them. Whether it does or not remains to be seen. But the idea that this group of men living in community, dedicating themselves to teaching, I found that impressive. In any case, I did my studies, and my first assignment was Brother Rice High School. That was back in 1962.
Mm-hmm.
And
my brother Rice?
Yes.
Okay.
And what was funny, my parents or my mother said, wow, you're going all the way out west. You're going to need long johns. I said, Ma, that's still part of the Eastern Zone,
But she was right about the long johns. Come on.
Well, New York is not so warm either.
I know.
Anyway,
yeah.
But I got a big kick out of that, having to wear long johns. In any case, I arrived here full of enthusiasm and a sense of dedication and so on. The school was just opening. They had just finished first and second year students. We were beginning junior year when I came. And so 1962 was filled with new hope because everything was brand new at the school. Even the desks, for example, moving desks from one place to another so that the rooms would be equipped so when the new class came in, they would find it easy to move around. To make a long story short, I became a brother, and I was happy in doing that. And I was a brother for many years, 31 years.
Right.
And, decisions don't happen automatically. They evolve, basically. But in 1970, let's say 1971 or 2, I started thinking, I was at that time still at Brother Ray's, and I was thinking maybe I should be a priest, but never mind. My intention now was to go work and live in Hawaii. That's what they told me. Mm-hmm. So I got to Hawaii in 1974. In 1974, I started looking around to see what things priests were doing at the time and so on. I think I could do that. I kept thinking, I really want to do that. I think so. And besides, dealing with teenagers, and I don't regret any of it, dealing with teenagers for 31 years is limiting, if you want. Mm-hmm. And now moving on to a different ministry where you deal from birth until death.
Yeah.
So you have the whole span of life that you're dealing with. That intrigued me. I mean, it made my mind wander about how do I do this? Where do I go? And so on. Well, I went through the usual procedures. I spoke to the Bishop of Honolulu because that's where I was at the time. And he said, well, let's be patient about this. Let's be patient. Then I had to speak to my provincial, my boss.
Yes.
And he said to me, we have to pray over this. We really do have to pray over this. Yeah. I said, okay, we'll pray over it. Yeah. But meanwhile, time went on. I finished my term in Honolulu, and I figured that would be a time to do. Mm-hmm. And so I spoke to my provincial. This was a good time for me to move on. Well, they need you back at Brother Rice in Michigan. Mm-hmm. I said, well, I was there for 11 years already, and so don't worry. You'll be the principal there. Uh-huh. It's a new ministry in a different way, so you can go with enthusiasm and do what you can. They do want you back, though. I said, okay. All right, so I did come back to Brother Rice, and I said, but, to the provincial, I said, there has to be a limit, though, because I can't be waiting too long. It's like I'm going to need a walker to get around by the time I'm ordained. It's not, you're not dealing with a little kid here. So finally, he eventually said, well, let's finish the term at Brother Rice. The term meaning going from 80 to 86. So in 1986, I went off to study at Catholic University. And interestingly, after the third year, my bishop said to me, would you mind going to Rome to finish off your first degree? And I said, I'd go in a heartbeat. So sure enough, I did my fourth year of theology at the Gregorian in Rome. Came back.
Can't beat that. And
was ordained in 1990. I was in a parish for only 5 years, and I really enjoyed that. Really enjoyed being in a parish.
I remember that, because we did talk about that.
And sure enough, back to Rome to study canon law. So the vocations of the priesthood, to answer your question quickly, I think I did answer it in many ways. It's a matter of, I don't think there's ever any one motive. I think there's a combination of things. I was happy with being a brother. I was not unhappy. Mm-hmm. I was happy about it. But by the same token, I was yearning for a change. And I thought that the priesthood is what I wanted, because it took care of the whole span of life from birth to death. So anyway, I ended up very happily as a priest. To this day, after 28 years, I don't regret my decision about being a priest. I purposely have left out the spiritual aspect of both.
Okay.
Obviously, there's a prayer life attached to both the brothers. Brothers more in community, praying in community. Priests have to learn to pray by themselves, but praying for the whole church. So you don't pray just for yourself. You pray for the whole church.
For guys like me.
Well, for everybody. Yeah,
I know,
I mean,
but I'm included in that.
Yeah,
obviously.
of course you are, and so am I. But I don't know. I'm just thinking there are two prayers that are considered public prayers in the church. One of them is the Mass. The other is the office. The priest has to do both as often as possible.
I remember that.
And so that's the public prayer, even though you're saying it privately, is still a public prayer. The Mass is no longer, how should I put it, in the old days, if you were at home and so on and so forth, you could do it by yourself on the kitchen counter. So Vatican II came across this, no more kitchen counter. You have to at least have one or two other people with you when you say the Mass.
Now, real quickly, do you know any other brothers that have become priests as well, like you?
I do.
Oh.
I do. Yeah.
And so you're not that unique.
No. It's not a lot,
Yeah.
but there were a certain number of them. There was a fellow that I still remember was kind of interesting because we lived in different parts of the country. I found out later we went through similar stages, even with the health issues. Having his first heart attack when I had my first, his second when I had my second.
Let's stay away from the third, okay?
So, but anyway, he didn't.
Yeah.
And so the poor guy, well, he's gone to heaven, I'm sure. John O'Brien is gone. But he's been gone for a while now. It's not just recent. But in any case, yes, he's at least one. And I've heard of a few others.
All right. Because those ranks are thinning a little bit, and we can talk about that at another time. I have never asked you this before. Are you in an order that, I know that there are the Jesuits, for
And
example.
Franciscans.
And the Franciscans. What is your order?
I don't belong to an order. As a brother, I did.
You are the Irish Christian brother.
Right.
Yeah.
That's the designation. They're now called the Christian Brothers. The funny part about that is to be FSCH with the initials, food, shelter, clothing, and heaven, too. That's what we used to joke about. Yeah, the initials were Fratres Christianarum Scholarum Hiberniae, which was the Brothers of the Christian Schools of Ireland. Then, around Vatican II in the 60s, they got rid of the Irish Christian Brothers, so it became CFC, the Congregation of Christian Brothers, Congregatio Fratres Christianarum. So, in any case, every priest has to belong to something. And I use that word purposely because the church word, if you want, the ecclesiastical word, would be incardinated. Incardination. Every priest has to be incardinated, either into a religious order or a diocese, which means then the order or the diocese has to take care of you for life.
Oh.
So I belong to the Diocese of Honolulu.
Oh, that's interesting. It sounds easier to explain than it is, but that's so.
Well, you just belong to that diocese. That means when I entered through that diocese, and
Right.
once you enter, that's it. It's like your family.
Sure. Okay, that's interesting. What do you like about this lifestyle?
Well, it's hard for me to compare it to others, but every morning you wake up, there's a new event. You meet new people. You meet new and interesting situations. It's never the same. It doesn't get boring. Let me put it this way.
Yeah.
It never gets boring. I like the variety of things that we're involved in, whether it be baptism, funerals, weddings, the regular masses, the Sunday masses, and so on. So there's a variety of the things that we do. Then we get involved in other things as well, whether it be education, whether it be social work. So there's different aspects of our lives depending on your interests and talents.
Not to mention the business side of it.
You bring up a very good point today. Pastors in particular, once they're appointed pastors, very often, not always, but very often, lack not only experience, but education in the area of finances. And so here they're asked to run this multi-million-dollar parish.
Yeah.
And you run it basically, the church has got the spiritual side, but it also has its physical side. When you're asked to run the physical side of the church, you have to have some ability. So a wise pastor would make sure to surround himself with experts in the field, and also to cover himself with good lawyers so that he has all of this experience around him. So when making a decision, he gets the input of all of these people to do the right thing. And so far, it's been working out. Obviously, for somebody that has a better knowledge and experience in finances, it's easier. But by the same token, it even works out for the person that hasn't done all of those studies.
So you're telling me then that it doesn't just happen miraculously that the church lights go on, and the heat goes on, desks appear in the grade school and high school?
I always said, when you are the principal of the high school, your best friend has to be the maintenance man.
I remember that as well.
You don't get around without that maintenance man. But anyway, we have to know what we're doing because of the physical aspect of the church, which brings me to just a little side thing here. Who is the church? The people are the church. You can have your most beautiful building, magnificent building, architecturally, everything else. Well, it's nothing unless the people are in there. They're the ones that make the church. So there is a spiritual side, but there's also the physical side of a church.
So many churches, unfortunately, have closed. And when you read about the mass mobs going back to these churches now, they're going because of the fact that within months, maybe just a year or so, they will be shuttered, they will close, because of the lack of parishioners and because of that, the physical plant, the costs just to keep it up.
I know, for example, I do a couple of weddings in the Sweetest Heart of Mary, which is a beautiful church in Detroit. It's architecturally, it's a real accomplishment. And so many of the young couples choose what we call destination weddings, and they get married in this particular church, even though the church itself is surrounded with almost nothing, torn down buildings and so on. Well, things are getting a lot better, but by the same token, the church can't support itself with just a couple of weddings. So they do have a couple of masses on the weekends, but not too many. And as you say, the mob masses, people do try to go to these things because they have sentimental value to the people.
Next question for you, sir. Today we are talking about the various questions that I have written down to ask Father Joe Grimaldi on the Father Joe Grimaldi podcast. Your daily life is essentially rather the same, is that fair to say? Or is it always different?
Well, I think what makes it different is the people, because it's the same in that I'm an early riser. So, you get things done in the morning. You could say prayers in the morning. Then you have to go and have Mass. Well, here you are, right away, saying Mass, a whole group of people. So many of them have different questions about this, that, and the other thing. So you're dealing with this variety of people that you see right at the beginning of the day. Then you might have somebody that needs to see you individually, and you talk to that person, right after the Mass. Or you will have appointments to go to the hospital to anoint someone who is sick or dying. Then, if there is a funeral coming up, you sit down with the family of the people that are going to be involved, and that involves not only learning about the individual who died. There's nothing worse than the priest preaching and not knowing who he's preaching about.
Nothing.
Okay?
When we've talked about that before, I admire you so much for so many different things, but you always get to know the family very well, so therefore you can talk about the person that you've just lost.
Yeah, exactly.
And you do a wonderful job of that, and that's why you're in such high demand, by the way.
Well, thank you. But in any case, so to give you an idea that then when you're a pastor, I'm speaking from the point of view of someone who's retired, but when you're a pastor, inevitably there are meetings. For example, I know that because of the problems that exist in the United States, worldwide, people that are having problems with security. Well, I know the pastor of the church of St. Hugo's, he's made it his mission to make sure that they're going to have the best security possible. So now there is a policeman on duty officially for every Mass, and he's just there. He's visible, his car is visible, and he is visible. Every Mass, they're trying to get all of the technology that you need to keep areas safe. So that is being installed in different parts of the building. Extra entrances. So what I mean by that, and I'm not saying it correctly, I realize that, but when you first go into a school building, you have your set of doors, and then there's going to be another set of doors, security doors, that are much, much more difficult to enter. He's made it his mission to make sure that the children are safe at the school, and also that the parishioners are safe, because, it doesn't take much for some crazy person to walk into the church and while Mass is going on and shoot down the congregation. It's happened.
Yes, these are strange days that we're living in, and we pray that never happens. We pray it never happens again, but unfortunately, it is going to happen again. Let me ask you another quick question. What role do you play in the community?
I try to be a leader. I try to give good example. I certainly am a human being, and I may fail at times. I may get angry at times when I shouldn't, if you're going to give that kind of an example. Road rage is a good example.
We've talked about your road rage, boy.
I am.
We're working on it together, folks. You should be advised that I'm being the counselor on this one.
But there are so many different things that is expected of the priest. One of the things I mentioned before, and I still believe it, very often the people hold the priest on a pedestal, and they forget that the priest is human. And so there's a lot expected of that priest. And they don't realize that he's a human being just like anybody else. Matter of fact, what's interesting in my mind is even the Protestant minister is not held to that same degree for some reason. If it's a priest, wow. And so, God forbid he should fall from that pedestal. He falls hard.
Do you ever get lonely?
Of course.
Okay. Do you ever wish you could be married?
Yes or no.
Well,
when you think about the responsibility of raising a family and then the reality, I don't know if the Catholic Church is ready to bring in a whole bunch of married priests. Financially, I don't think they could support that. It's difficult enough supporting a single priest. And the other thing, too, if you're going to be a priest, you really have dedicated yourself to following in the path of Jesus Christ. But the congregation comes first. If you are a married man, your first obligation is to your family, your wife and your family. Then the church, if you want. So it's very difficult to compromise that when you're dealing with a pastor, let's say, of a church. Can he really compromise keeping a family in there and also being called in the middle of the night to anoint somebody? Now, that's probably the most exaggerated part.
Mm-hmm.
But there are other things. For example, you're constantly being
You're going to
called.
get some pushback on that, I'm telling you. I can feel people right now listening to that saying, well, doctors can do it. Now granted, the hospital is not paying for the family like the Catholic Church
Sure.
does with the priest.
Yeah.
But you're talking about the middle of the night. Yeah, I agree with you on that. But I'm just saying that there are people out there right now that think that the population of the church would grow if there was allowed to be married priests.
Yeah, and you're speaking to someone who says we should have married priests.
And you've said before that you think it will happen, but not in your lifetime.
No, not in my life. But right now, I'm just so thrilled to see that the Holy Father is open to a lot of things that nobody ever thought would be. At least he's open for discussion.
I want to talk to you now about your hobbies and interests. These are the easy ones now.
You think they're easy, but let's see.
Now, wait a minute.
Walking is what I do a lot.
You like to walk. You like to walk a lot. You like a good Italian meal, right?
You bet your life I do.
Okay, well, that's...
But I like food in general.
Nicely played.
Whether it's Italian or Polish, I'll eat it.
I guess this could be our final question for you. And as always, thank you so much for doing this. What is the one thing that you dream of doing someday?
The one thing that comes to mind is the way. The way. Are you familiar with the way?
I am not.
Oh.
Well, we've got time. Tell me about the way.
There are many people that have started this. It's a walk. You start somewhere anywhere you want, but you end up at St. James Cathedral in Spain. And so along the way you do, it could be 30 days, it could be 15 days, depending on yourself.
The movie was called The Way, and who starred in the movie, or whose idea was it?
Martin Sheen.
Oh, okay. We all know Martin Sheen.
Yeah, I think.
Sure.
But the idea of walking for so many miles with strangers is a way of having a religious experience and meeting people along the way that you can communicate with and so on. It's probably related to the old idea of pilgrimages, huh?
Sure.
So you would start off at one place and keep going until you can. But just the idea that it's nothing but walking. And it could be days and days and days.
So what do you set up a little campground then at the end of the day and sort of get together, have a little food, and there must be stops along the way. There has to be stops along the way, yeah.
But it's exactly the way you say, and that's what the breaking of the bread brings the people together, and so on and so forth. There's certain areas where they stop for a respite, if you want.
All right, so this is something you would like to do, the way.
Yeah,
okay.
I think that would be fantastic.
All right, well, I'll get on and talk to my agent about that, the travel agent, that is. What is your favorite Italian dish when you go back to food? Oh, boy, you can't even answer because you like them all, don't you?
I have to admit that, there are very few things I don't like about Italian cooking. And I could easily become a vegetarian with Italian food. Oh. Pasta is not always the main
ingredient. Oh, I know, yeah. Was your mom a good cook?
Excellent.
No kidding.
Excellent.
And how do you consider yourself when it comes to finding your way around the kitchen, sir?
I'm not going to starve.
Have you ever offended somebody over their Italian cooking? Have you ever said, could I used a little more basil?
That's not the thing to do.
All right,
you just say it's interesting.
I want to end by telling everyone, if they didn't know, that Father Joe Grimaldi and I do go back to the 60s. As a matter of fact, I attended Brother Rice, and I graduated in the year 1969. I believe I had you for one or two classes. I really don't remember, and I certainly don't expect you to remember. I know you taught Latin and I believe French, and you taught, and you were everybody's favorite, and you remain that way today. So that's our connection. That's how I got to know Father Joe Grimaldi, and then we've run into each other over the years, many years, and we've stayed close, and so therefore there is that connection. If you've ever wondered why is this guy Ken Calvert associating himself with Father Joe Grimaldi, and as we put it out there in basically black and white, a rock and roller and a holy roller. What can come out of that? Well, something pretty darn good called the Father Joe Podcast.
You know what's coming out of it is the deep sense of religion that Ken Calvert has that doesn't always show itself, but once you get to know him, it's there.
Well, it was, hey, listen, I was interviewing you. We're not going the other way. As a wise person once said, and it was somebody that taught me at Brother Rice, I said something once about being bored, and that person looked at me and said, you know something, Ken? Only boring people get bored.
Aha.
And I've always, so we'll end with that. My words of wisdom for the day. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I think it was a great interchange.
All right, now listen, we're going to do this again. It's the Father Joe podcast, and I want to thank you all for joining us. I'm Ken Calvert, Father Joe Grimaldi. I'll see you down the road.
I look forward to seeing you as well. Take care. This is Father Joe Grimaldi, and I look forward to seeing you next time on the Father Joe podcast.
If you have a question or a comment for the Father Joe podcast, send it to fatherjoepodcast@gmail.com. That's fatherjoepodcast@gmail.com. Follow Father Joe on Twitter @FatherJoePodcast. The Twitter address again is @FatherJoePodcast. Please subscribe to the Father Joe podcast on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, TuneIn, and soon on iHeartRadio. We also ask that you rate the podcast and feel free to leave a comment. And finally, if you have a friend that you think might enjoy the podcast, please pass it along. Thanks again for listening, everybody, and see you next time.